Welcome to Bits and Pieces Quilting. Today I am super excited to share with you a quilt that has been many, many years in the making. So stay tuned. Hi, I'm Michelle, and today's project is so close to my heart. As a child, my favorite book was Anne of Green Gables and all of the series. And then if you're a person of a certain age, you might remember when the Anne of Green Gables movie came out. And then the follow-on shows like Road to Avonlea. I was obsessed. I was passionate about these shows and the books and the stories, and it's just so heartwarming. And about 20 some odd years ago, I found some Anne of Green Gables fabric, which has sat in my collection for a very long time. But I have finally found the perfect pattern to use these fabrics, and I can't wait to show you. So stay tuned. This is the fabric pull for my Anne of Green Gables quilts. Because of course, if you're doing Anne of Green Gables, you have to make one for yourself, but also one for your bosom friend. So I'm going to be making two. It's a bit out of control, but that's largely because I'm not entirely sure how this is all going to go yet. But let's start with the focal fabrics. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different Anne of Green Gables fabrics. I have 3 that are like this. They're exactly the same, just different colorways. You can see you sort of have a little bit of a cartoony sort of Anne. And then this bottom one is just sort of a 2-color, well, not quite 2 colors, but a very monotone sort of colorway. Very cute. I have this standalone, which has these little, what do you call those, little cameos almost of Diana Barry and Anne Shirley. It's very cute. These two are the same fabric, just different colorways with little Anne's and Green Gables houses. And then these 3 are the same as well with different colorways in the beige, medium beige, light beige, and this beautiful coral peachy pink color. So these fabrics are ancient. I have actually tried to look up, they're all made by the same manufacturer, believe it or not. The selvage has told me that. It's a Japanese company. I've been able to figure out that much. But some of these have a website on them. The website doesn't exist anymore. I've tried to Google the name of the fabric company, also not having a lot of luck tracking it down. Here we go. This is the selvage. It's a Japanese company. Hanamomen, Hanamomen maybe, and then this and.net.com. That website doesn't work anymore. There's no year on these, but I distinctly recall being in Prince Edward Island probably 20 years ago, 22 years ago. They're quite old. They're very, very old. But I loved them when I bought them. And then I think Mom bought me these ones actually. Loved them when I bought them, but honestly had no idea what to do with them and struggled for years, clearly 20 plus years, to figure out what to do with them. And so imagine how thrilled I was when I saw this tilde pattern that we're going to use. It was like a lightning bolt. It was just that moment where I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be perfect. But there's not just one tilde pattern. There's actually 3 of them. One, and I'll put the little images here and the links in the description down below for you. And they're all free patterns, which is amazing. So we have Daydreamer, which is a really pretty face-on kind of girl with some tulips, really tall tulips, which I love. Windy Day, which is probably my favorite. Love those. And I think there's trees in the Windy Day and a little dog. And then the hen house girl and she has more of a side on kind of profile with some chickens. So I've looked at the math and I've done a little bit of mathing. Windy Day and hen house girls are the same, so they're interchangeable easily enough. And the Daydreamer girl is about is 1 inch shorter. So I think I've worked out where I can add an inch in order to blend her in as well with the plan. So I have printed out the instructions because there's a lot of little pieces here. So I've printed out the instructions, and you can go and get your own versions of these from the Tilda website. Tons and tons and tons and tons of little pieces. So it's a little bit overwhelming, but I'm going to take it a little bit at a time. I bought this blue, and this is going to be my background fabric. I didn't want to use white or cream, and so I thought something that had sort of a sky feel to it, because the Anna Green Gables fabrics are going to be mainly the dresses and the outfits for the girls. And then I needed to find faces and hair. So I have these three faces. I have a really light flesh tone, sort of a medium, and then a darker flesh tone, so that we have some nice diversity and variety in our little girls. And then I was looking through my collection for hair colors, and I haven't quite settled on the perfect orange for Anne. I think this might be it, but a close second is this one. So I'm going to do some tests and we'll see what's what. And I can see on camera that they actually don't look all that different. One is a slightly lighter batik, and then this one has a lot of darker bits in it. So I think because of the way I always envision Anne, she'll get the lightest skin tone. So we'll see how that goes in terms of making hair and faces for Anne. I pulled this one because I thought it might make an interesting blonde, but we'll see. I've got a couple of dark browns. Well, I've got a medium brown here, and then another medium brown here, which might go with my darker skin tones, and then an even darker brown. I think this orange is just not right. So I don't think I'm going to use that for hair. Because I'm a person of a certain age, I'm actually wondering about a little gray-haired girl in some of this, but I'm not sure about that either. I've got some blacks here for some nice dark hair, and then a nice dark brown as well. So these are all my hair colors and my face colors to go with the backgrounds. And then up here, I have just gone through my collection and pulled out anything and everything that I thought might go and pick up some of the colors in some of these fabrics. I'm looking at this reddish color. I'm looking at something to complement this whatever color this is, this coral color. There's a nice kind of teal here. There's some more oranges. So I like all of those. Something in a nice mustardy yellow. There's a lot of, and then of course greens for the trees. So lots of things here to pick up on that I've just pulled out of the collection. And then a couple of little cheeky prints. So I have these little nests, which might be cute for the body for a chicken. And I don't know if there's an opportunity to maybe use these cats, but we'll see. I've got lots of other fabrics, as you can imagine, so I may end up going back into the stash to see what else I can find. It's a little overwhelming. In fact, it's a lot overwhelming. So I think what I'm probably going to do is start with the heads and the faces. So let me zoom in here. This is all just hair color, face color, and background. So I think that's going to be a really good place to start. I'm going to make a couple of the faces and then see if I can figure out what their outfits are going to look like after that. Things have gotten a tiny bit out of control. I was going to just do one or two blocks as a test, starting with the head, but then I started cutting and I realized I was going to have pieces of different sizes all over the place. And to be a little bit more efficient, I thought I'd cut a few multiples. But then that also has gotten out of control. And so in order to organize, I have made these little tags. So I've got the Daydreamer, the Windy Day, and the Hen House. And so all of these pieces are for the head unit for the Windy Day, for the Daydreamer, etc. I have more faces here than I have other body parts, other backgrounds, and other hair. I was able to get one red head out of this really nice orange, I think, for each of the three different styles of little girls. And then I've cut some black and brown. So I'm going to start now, finally, sewing. But yeah, I was hoping just to make one as a test, but that sort of got away from me. Lots of little pieces here. I'm going to start by making the half square triangles. Each of them need half square triangles for the hair. So I'm going to start by making a few of those and then start to figure out the best way to assemble these units. I have my first head and hair made, and I thought I'd share a few insights. So first and foremost, these 1.5 inch half square triangles are adorable. I don't think I've ever made half square triangles in this size, but wow, they're super cute. So you start with 2 inch squares and then you make them draw a line down the center and make them like half square triangles. I definitely have done 2.5 inch and 2 inch, but I don't think I've ever done 1.5. So really adorable. And with all due respect to Jenny Doan at Missouri Star Quilt Company when she says it's not harder, it's just smaller. Yeah, I think it just takes a little bit more time and care when it's smaller because you've got a lot less room to cover up any errors. So these are my first ones. I did a little batch of them, so they're all ready to go. I, as always, press those seams open to reduce the bulk because it is such a small square. I want to spread out that bulk as much as possible. So then looking at the pattern, I decided to break it into 3 segments. So the pattern, you can sort of see here, it sort of made sense to divide it into the head, the hair on either side, and then this little brick of background that gets tagged on to the end. So that's how I approached it and sewed these little units together here in the middle and added the top and bottom, then added this brick on the right. Then I did the center square with its snowballs. Normally, I save these offcuts when it's a 2.5 inch square, but in this case, this is only a 1.5 inch square, so the offcuts are teeny weeny, and they're just way too small to save. These I don't know if you can see this, but how big is it's so small. It's so small. It's about half of a 1 inch square, and yeah, just that's just too small. These are maybe, but yeah, I honestly, no, I'm not going to be saving them. I pressed the seams open between my half square triangles and I pressed my seams open in the middle here. But when I added these bricks top and bottom, I decided to press the seams in one direction, mainly because I didn't want to bring this part back on itself. There was some bulk there that I didn't want to have to fold back on itself if I were to press those seams open. So it's a mix of seams pressed open and seams pressed to one side. Same thing here with the snowballing. I pressed these just the way that you normally do with a snowballed corner. But can you see on let me see if I can zoom you in. I am already a little bit off, and this is why I wanted to show you. So let me center that again. Can you see here how this is already not quite fitting properly? So this is supposed to be 3.5 inches square, and if I bring my ruler in here, I can see that the center is not quite 3.5. It's sort of lost a little smidge, lost about a 16th of an inch somewhere along the way. And then this piece up top with my snowballing seems to have gained at least a 16th, maybe even almost an eighth. So in order to try to keep things as accurate as possible going forward, I'm actually going to trim this just a little bit so I get back to 3.5 again. I don't want to try and fudge it. I don't want to try and just make it work. I want to square it up at this stage so that I can move forward knowing that I've got things to be the size that they need to be. But otherwise, the little head is looking so cute. This reminds me a lot of Elizabeth Hartman patterns. And I highly recommend you check out my video on my fascination with Elizabeth Hartman patterns, because I've got a lot of tips and tricks in there for how to deal with these patterns that have tons and tons and tons of pieces. But I'll reiterate my first, maybe, I don't remember, I'll have to double check, one of my key points, which is about not rushing and really just enjoying the process. This is going to take time. This is going to be time consuming, but I think the effort is going to be so worth it because she's already looking adorable and she doesn't even have a body yet. She just has a head and pigtails. I've been sewing away on my Anna Green Gables girls and I'm loving them. Look at how adorable they are. These are the Windy Day girls. I've got 4 of them. I've got the Hen House Girls. I think that's what this one is. There's four of them. And then these are the Daydreamer Girls. They are adorable. I am just absolutely loving them. The pattern calls for French knots with embroidery floss for eyeballs. I'm gonna wait and decide what I'm gonna do a little closer to the end. I might do the French knots, but I might actually even see if I can find teeny weeny little buttons to sew on. We'll see. They are looking fabulous. I stopped at 4 each um, because I've started to actually get worried about how much background fabric I have. They're not little. These little girls are not little. I think because the whole pattern fits on a single sheet of paper and only takes up a small amount of paper on this little sheet, but I've completely underestimated the size of the pieces and the size of of the pieces and the amount of background fabric I'm going to need. I know I said earlier in the video that the little girls are 25.5 inches tall. I know how big 25.5 inches are, but I think I didn't quite grasp it until I was cutting the pieces. So looking at this piece on the end and then looking at the chickens, look how cute the chickens are. That's this little chicken down here, and look how big it is. And so I thought I had gobs and gobs and gobs of background fabric. But now that I've been cutting for a little bit, this this is all that I have left. And it looks like a lot still, but I had originally planned two full quilts. I'd originally planned 30 little girls, 12 for each quilt times two for 24, with six left over for like a baby quilt or a smaller quilt. Yeah, I'm going to work on one and see if I have enough background fabric for one quilt before I attempt to make the second one. So that's why I've stopped at 12 little girl heads. So I'm making four of each variety. So with that in mind, I want to show you a few little tricks. So if you've watched my channel, you know that these sew and flip units, these are the pieces that you get when you put a 2.5 inch square on the corner, something like this. You put the square here, you draw a diagonal line, you sew that, and you flip it back. It's that sew and flip method that we see to snowball corners and things. If you've watched my channel, you know that I very frequently will then sew them down this straight side. I'll cut off the extra, sew them down this straight side, and then sew these together and square them up to 2 inches like these ones here to make these leftover little scrappy blocks. So here's the little hair piece that would have come off of these extras. So that's what I normally do, and that's what I started to do with all of these in order just to keep up with the scrap management and finish them as I go and that sort of thing. So I have all of these ready to get put together. But then I started to get really worried about having enough background fabric. So that got me to thinking there's a lot more sew and flip pieces across this project. And so can I actually use these pieces? This is the offcut from a 2 inch sew and flip piece. So I have the other fabric. This was an offcut from the chickens. So that's how it would have come off the project. Let me find my chicken and show you. Here we go. That would have come off of this corner where I put a 2 inch square or a 2.5 inch square in this case, a 2 inch square here, sew and flip, and then you cut off the extra. This is the extra that would have been cut off from there. Can you see that? Do I need to zoom in a little maybe? That's the extra that would have been cut off from there. And I was originally going to throw these teeny ones away because I only saved the offcuts of 2.5 sew and flip units. And I was going to throw them away. But then, like I said, I'm a little worried about having enough background fabric. So I got to thinking in the Hen House Girl, the little piece right over here, this little R piece on the top of the shoulder, that's a 1 inch square. That's a sew and flip unit. So I need a 1 inch square of background fabric to sew and flip. Well, I can get that out of this. And let me show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to put my ruler down. Actually, I'm going to zoom in a tiny bit more so you can really see this. There we go. I'm going to put my ruler here, and you can see if I trim this to 1.5 inch, or sorry, 1 inch square, I have a 1 inch square now with a little bite out of it. But I don't need that corner because this is going to go on the end of my sleeve unit. I'm going to draw my line from corner to corner. I used this technique or something similar to this in the flyaway quilt, so you may have seen this before. And then I'm going to take my little shoulder, well, it's my giant shoulder piece. So this is her little arm, and this is, actually, I'll zoom back out again. That's her little hand. This is the bottom part of her dress. This is her sleeve. And this little piece now goes on this corner, and I line this up. Let me zoom you back in again. I line this up nice and tight there. I sew down that line, and then I sew and flip, and that's all I need. That's the piece that I need to finish that little corner. It doesn't matter if that little bite is missing out of that piece of fabric. So this is how I am using some of these pieces. So with the 2 inch square offcuts, I can cut 1 inch little sew and flip units. And out of the 2.5 inch offcuts, that's these bigger pieces, I can cut 1.5 sew and flip units. And there are quite a few 1.5 inch sew and flip units in this project. So this is sort of the ultimate use of bits and pieces, perhaps, but like I said, I'm really worried about having enough background fabric, and this is one of the ways that I'm going to combat against that. This project also calls for half, what are they called? It's not a half square triangle, it's a triangle made out of half rectangle triangles, is that what they're called? I have never made these before, so this is a great skill builder for me. I have followed the instructions that are in the pattern. I've cut the pieces to the size recommended in the pattern. I didn't draw my marks. I didn't draw the marks down the side because I only need the marks in the corner. So what I've done is I've put these little cross hatches onto the back side of my background fabric and onto the front side. Can you see that? Onto the front side of the other fabric. So I know where my 1/4 inch seam allowances are on both of those pieces of fabric. And then, like the pattern shows you, I've drawn this diagonal line. And so what you do with these is you turn this top piece like this, you line up your marks perfectly, top and bottom, pin them. And I did all of that. I'm not normally a pinner, but I wanted to be really careful here. Line up those marks, pin them, and then you sew along this diagonal. And once you do that, imagine that that seam has been sewn. When you fold this back, you have this beautiful rectangle. And this is the dress of the little girl. This is beautiful 2 triangles to make up a rectangle. So fabulous. I did that. I did that with this coral color, and here's my result, and it looks fantastic, and it's exactly perfectly the size that I need. No need to square it up. No, nothing. But when you do that, so let me fold this back up even though it's been pressed. When you do that and you cut the pieces, and I've pressed the seams open because that's what I always do, there is this whole piece that gets cut off, this one right here. That's the piece where after I sewed my line, that's the piece that gets cut off. And that's extra. That's not useful for the project. And I thought, oh, wait a minute. Wait, I don't like not having a use for this. So I've got to thinking, and I'm going to test it, and I might actually test it on some scraps because, see, my point earlier reiterated 1,000 times, I'm running low on background fabric. What if I cut, because this, can you see, it's the same, it's the right angles. The angle is right, the directions are right, and just like with half square triangles, you get 2 out of every unit that you make. But because I sewed directly down the seam line, this is too small. So I could make a smaller dress for my girl, but I don't want to get into that yet. But I got to thinking, what if I make these pieces, these squares, bigger? And then instead of sewing exactly corner to corner, I sew on a 1/4 inch away from that line, the way that you do for a half square triangle, then cut it. Will I get 2 that are exactly the same then that I could square to the right size? So I'm going to try that on some scrap and I'll show you that process to see if that's going to work. But and then if it does, that's what I'm going to do for all the other dresses so that I can save and make the most use of my background of all my fabric, frankly, because what do I do with this? These pieces, I sewed them together just to see what would happen, but these pieces would just be separate pieces. And yes, I can cut them down into smaller things to use across the project, but if I have actually no waste at all, that would be preferable. So the pattern, let me pull the pattern up here so you can see it. That's this half triangle rectangle thing here. I need to do another one for the bottom part of her dress down here. Do you see that? So I've already cut the pieces, but I should have I should have tested all of this before. But then I got to thinking, I wonder if I could just square up this piece, because it needs to go like this for the bottom of her dress. Could I just square up this piece for that rectangle? That's actually a little harder than I thought it would be. I tried to get my ruler out to figure out what the angle was and how I would go about squaring it up, and I was having a lot of trouble visualizing it. So what I did was I cut a piece of paper that's exactly the size that this piece needs to be, which is 8 inches by 3.5 inches. And then I drew that seam line, that diagonal seam line, just in pencil. And so when I put this on top of this, I'm going to zoom in again so you can maybe see that pencil line. You can see in terms of the angle's not quite right. So no matter where I put this along the angle, my piece of paper is crooked to get the angle right. So I'm debating with myself, and you know what? I'm probably going to do it because I'm just so anti-waste. I think I am actually going to use this as my little paper template, and I'm going to cut this out, even though that's going to give me bias edges on this fabric. I think once I sew it into the quilt, I don't think anyone's ever going to notice, and as long as I'm careful about adding this piece to all of the other pieces in the quilt, I think it'll be okay. And then I'll still have these bits that I can use for other pieces as needed. But the idea of cutting 2 more rectangles of fabric this size, of making this again, and then having that waist piece again, I think this is probably the approach I'm going to take. But before I cut the dresses for the other girls, because I haven't cut those yet, I'm going to do a test about seeing if I can get 2 out of 1 with a slightly larger piece of fabric. I'll report back on my success or failure so that you could learn with me. It's going to be fun. Let's go. This is one of my little girls all finished. She looks so good. But I want to show you a couple of things. So because of the way that you mark the half rectangle triangles, I end up with these pencil marks on the front of my project, which I'm not quite so happy about. So I think I might go to chalk, but I've also learned, there's some more pencil marks up here that I just want to point out here. I've also learned that you only need to mark 2 of the corners. You don't need to mark all 4 of them. So that is definitely a piece of learning. And now I'm going to try my experiment. So for the next little girl, for Windy Day, this unit E down here is supposed to be 8.5 by 3.5, and that's the size that I'm supposed to cut the fabric. So I've cut these pieces an inch bigger, 9.5 by 4.5. And because of those pencil marks, I've only marked these 2 corners and these 2 corners. So now I'm going to turn it sideways like this, pin it in place properly. I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch away from this line along both, I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch on both sides of that line, cut it apart, and see how big my pieces are, and if I'm going to be able to square them up to the size that I need. So fingers crossed. If this doesn't work, I'm hoping to be able to explain why, but I think it will. So hopefully it will, and I won't have to explain anything. I'm going to go pin this properly and give it a little sew, and we'll come back and see how it turned out. I've sewn my seams, and I've flipped this over so that you can actually see my stitch lines because they don't show up on this side. So this is a 1/4 inch on either side of that center line, and I'm gonna try and do this in real time and just see what happens. So lay my ruler down, measure the 1/4 inch line, give this a slice, and I'm so curious. I'm so curious to see if this is gonna work, and I really, really hope it does. So as I open that up, it looks good. This one looks exactly the same, but it's all gonna come down to the size. So I'm gonna do a quick measurement here. Okay, so that's exciting. It's about 4 inches by about 9 and a bit. Okay, so I haven't lost that much. I actually cut it 4.5 and 9.5, and I'm at 9 1/4 by about 4 inches. So that's good. I need 8.5 by 3.5. So I'm going to press these, and then I'll come back and see if I can figure out how to trim them. This is probably going to be a little harder than I thought it was going to be. So I have squared up these 2 corners. And all I did, if I use this other one as my example, I just wanted to trim off all of this stuff up at the top. So I just lined my ruler up. I made sure that the point of my ruler was at the point here. And I just trimmed a little tiny bit off the side and then across the top. So it's a nice square corner. So that's what this corner is. And then my thought was that I could then use my ruler, apologies for the glare of the light overhead. I thought I could use my ruler and line up 3.5 by 8.5 on my ruler. But that's not going to work because if I line it up 8.5 by 3.5, can you see what's happening? My point is up here. It's not on this diagonal line. So that's not going to work. And I'm not sure that I know how to reason out the geometry to get this to work. So you know what I'm going to do? This is my template from earlier when I was cutting those other triangles to the right size, and they turned out all right. This is not something I advocate on a regular basis. You definitely want to keep straight of grain as much as you can, but if I bring this little piece of the little girl in here, this piece right in here is the one that I cut out, and if you look really closely, you can tell that the straight of grain is definitely wonky. But in the finished project, nobody's ever going to notice, and eventually it's all going to be sewn in, so it's not going to pull in any kind of strange way. But what was really useful was my little pattern. So this is 3.5 by 8, 3.5 by 8, but I need, for these pieces, I need 3.5 by 8.5. So I think I'm just going to go and make myself one of these patterns, because I think if it's the right size, if you imagine this here, that's how I would cut a 3.5 by 8 inch. And I'm hoping if I make a 3.5 by 8.5, that this is still going to work. So I'm going to make one of these in paper and come back and give that a try. So this little template, which I just cut out of a piece of scrap paper, is 3.5 by 8.5, which is the size I need. And I've drawn the diagonal line, which I'm just going to line up with my seam lines. And I think I might grab a pin, and well, actually no, it's going to be harder to trim with a pin. So I'm going to leave it there, put my ruler down on top, and use this as my guidelines to get my 3.5 by 8 inch piece. A little bit of an extra step perhaps, but almost no wasted fabric, which I actually really, really love. So I think I'm going to do this going forward for the other dresses in this project because I don't want to waste that background fabric. And I think this is going to work. I think this is going to give me straight of grain pieces with very little waste. And because I'm making multiples, make sure I get this lined up properly. I'm trying to talk and trim at the same time. Because I'm making multiples, so I would have to make 2 of each dress type. But I'm okay with that. I don't have that many fabrics to choose from that I could have multiple different kinds of dresses for my little girls. So this, I think, is going to work out well. I will do a little bit more research on my own to see if there is a mathematical geometric way to do this, to figure out the math properly so that you do get perfect half rectangle triangles. But this sort of cheat approach, I think, is going to work. So my corners come up pretty sharp, which is good, which is sort of the objective. And if that were the real piece, it would go into the final project as the bottom of her dress, and I think it's going to work out well. I have finished my blocks. I have 16 blocks in total, but I think I'm only going to use 15. And this is the layout. These little girls are huge. They're 25.5 inches each, unfinished. So this is already 75 inches, and then minus seam allowances. But I need to put a little bit of sashing in between the rows here. But I wanted to get the layout sorted out first. I'm really pleased with the little butterfly girls. I added a 1/2 inch to the skirt and a 1/2 inch to the tunic to bring them up to the same size as the other girls. And that's turned out really, really well. Where's my favorite one? Where did she go? Oh, I guess it's this one that's my favorite one. The orange-haired Anne with her little butterfly. And I've put a cute little bird's nests in their feet just because I thought that was funny. And I love, 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 love this orange butterfly fabric. Can you see how it's iridescent and shimmery? It's been in my collection forever. And it's a weird, weird texture. So that spot, and there's another orange butterfly over here. Those spots are either going to be the first to wear out or the spots that are going to last forever. I'm not really sure. That is I think I'm 90% sure it's a synthetic fiber, but I just love the sparkle it gives those butterflies. I moved down here to the kitchen because there's not enough space in my sewing room to lay these out. This has been harder than I expected. So I got all of the lengths to match up, which was great. But to try to figure out how to position them, I wanted to make sure that the girls with the blowing scarves and hair were next to the trees because the trees have little leaves blowing off of them. So I've done that in 3 instances. I have one extra girl with blowing hair, and she's not going to make it into this quilt because there's just no space for her. Also, thanks to the Tilda people, because somebody was thinking, the chicken girls and the butterfly girls are exactly the same width. So that makes using them interchangeably really, really easy. I've tried to balance dress colors, face tones, hair colors across the whole quilt. And I think it looks really, really sweet. I'm really, really happy with it. There's lots of little Anna Green Gables moments all across the whole quilt, so a little bit of an I Spy moment. There's some Anna Green Gables in the trees that we talked about. The chicken is Anna Green Gables fabric. Of course, all the dresses and tunics are Anna Green Gables fabrics. Some of the sleeves, as well as the tunics, are Anna Green Gables fabrics. So super charming, super adorable. I have about 10 inches of the background fabric left. It's been really, really, really close. So I think I'm going to put a 1.5 inch strip in between these rows and then just get them sewn together. I don't think I have enough fabric to do a short little border around the edges, but we'll see at the end. And then over here on the kitchen counter, I have my last little lonely block. So I've got to figure out what to do with her. I'd love to make her another tree, but I'm not sure if I have enough background for her. But we'll see. I was also recently at the fabric store and bought another pale blue background. I don't think it matches or coordinates with this existing one, so we'll have to figure it out. But we're going to use these bits and pieces. You just wait and see. I'm going to go and get this sewn together. And this is the final project. She is so beautiful and it's huge. Poor Jason is stretched out back there trying to hold her up for me while I keep filming this. The little girl blocks are 25.5 inches each, and then you add the sashing. So this is a big, big quilt, but I just love it. There are little Anne of Green Gables everywhere, in the dresses, in the trees, in the chickens. I love the dogs. I love the butterflies. I love the blowing hair. It's just so charming. I'm going to have to make a decision about what to do about the eyes for the little girls, whether I do embroidery knots or small little buttons, or maybe I just leave them exactly the way they are. I'll have to give that some thought. I'm really, really thrilled with the way this has turned out. It uses a lot of background fabric, and I'm so grateful I was able to squeeze out enough to finish this project. There's almost 3 meters of background fabric in this, so if you give it a try, you're going to need more background fabric than you ever think that you will. Thanks very much for watching. this really exciting project with the Tilda girls and my Anne of Green Gables fabric. As I said at the beginning, I'm making two of these because, of course, if you know Anne, you know you have to make one for your bosom friend. So I've shown you the first one I finished. The other one, I've made all of the pieces, but I will get that sewn together really soon, and I can't wait to get them quilted and finished. Thanks very much for watching, and don't forget to make the most of your fabric bits and pieces.